Peyton. Nice to see you again on this beautiful Sunday. This time with a quote by Mark Twain. He once said, I've had a lot of worries in my life, most of which never happened, which closely relates to the Stoic quote by Seneca: We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Do you have some ideas upon these quotes, man? Let's share them.
Hey man, great to be back with you. Sure do. These are quotes that point to something that's very important, in my opinion, as it relates to the quality of our experience here as Homo sapiens. And that concept is that thoughts are not just a product of external circumstances, not just something that we're authoring and talking to ourselves, but importantly, these are causal factors of our experience. And perhaps the most important and most impactful causal factor to the quality of our experience as humans. If we pay close attention, we can see that when we think negative thoughts, or when we ruminate and ruminate and ruminate to no end, we actually cause ourselves to suffer. And it's an ever-present temptation for all of us who are not living in caves and out here engaged in the real world, talking with humans, navigating relationships, having things that we want and don't want, and inevitably dealing with a lot of situations where we're tempted to plan them out, we're tempted to think about them, we're tempted to try to quote unquote get to the bottom of it. And to an extent, of course, we're going to think. Of course, there's a balance and a moderation. And the end of this is not to completely have a blank mind that's incapable of stringing together language in our brains, that's incapable of considering the future or considering potential implications of our decisions and actions in the present. But almost all of us are strongly tempted, myself included, and perhaps myself more than most, to ruminate and ruminate and ruminate, and to think about the future, and to worry about the future, and to get caught up in anger over situations that haven't even happened yet, or caught up in fear over situations that may not even come to pass. And the corrective that Seneca and Mark Twain are pointing to here is, yes, of course, there's some extent to which we need to consider the future, to consider the possibilities that might surprise us or that we might encounter, potential difficulties in situations with other people, potential difficulties in situations not necessarily involving other people. But we are, by our nature, almost all of us, very, very tempted to go way out of balance on this. The ego in the story and the narrative in our brain has certain repetitive thoughts and certain tendencies and habits. And when these neurons are firing together, they're wiring together. A lot of times, if we get into the habit of worrying about the future, this is a habit that will self-reinforce. And there's a logic within our brain. There's an implication of this thinker, this story, this problem solver, this manager part of us that tells us over and over and over that we should be doing this, that this is productive, that this is important for us, or even essential, that if we don't spend this 30 minutes while I'm eating my lunch thinking about a conversation that may or may not happen tomorrow or in a week or may or may not ever happen, that I'm wasting an opportunity to prepare, or there's something important that I might get taken off guard by. And the issue with this is if we spend our time doing this, it can very, very easily become a habit that we cease to even recognize is going on all the time. I can be brushing my teeth and thinking about this situation. I can be going on a walk and thinking about this situation. I can be talking to somebody and not present because I'm thinking about another conversation that I'm anticipating of the next day, or another problem that I imagine might arise that may or may not arise. And this can bring us out of the present moment. This can bring us out of reality. And Alan Watts talks about people who think all the time have nothing to think about except thoughts. And it can distance ourselves from reality. It can separate ourselves from the present moment and from other people. And this is a core temptation that a lot of us live with. This is an issue that is kind of set out for us and wired by the tendencies of our brain and by the this language, this thinker, this thought process going on in our head that doesn't appear to have an off switch. And so it's really important to understand, first of all, these habits are self-reinforcing and they tend to skew toward imbalance if we don't do anything about it, if we're not intentional about our thoughts. And second of all, the quality of our thoughts, the nature of our thoughts, the repetitiveness of our thoughts, the characteristics of fear or worry or anxiety or rumination, these cause us to be unhappy. These do cause us to suffer. These twist us up in knots in our brain. And a lot of times, this is the actual proximate cause of discontent, unhappiness, and the feeling of separation, isolation, loneliness, worry, and fear that can come to consume us as humans, that can come to rule us, and that can separate us from the people around us. And so, this project of actually paying attention to what's going on within our brains and actually understanding that if we're spending all of our time just anticipating negative situations in the future, if we're spending all of our time in fear and worry about a lot of stuff that doesn't end up coming to happen, then in the end, we can cause ourselves to be more weakened, more fragile, more vulnerable to the future, less able to adapt and overcome the things that actually do come in front of us because we're unhappy, we're caught up in knots, we're made rigid by excessive thinking, excessive planning, excessive rumination, excessive self-concept. And it's a huge temptation that all of us face. And ultimately, we can't totally log off of thoughts and permanently stop thinking. So this is a dance that we've got to dance during our life. We're going to be tempted and drawn in this way and that way. And we're always at the temptation. We're always faced with this tendency to be drawn into imbalance, at least when we're in challenging phases of life or we're facing potentially tumultuous situations that we have some concern about. And so this is a project that's quite challenging and ever present for us, and also quite important because it dictates a lot of the quality of our experience. At least it does for me. What are your thoughts about this, man? One of us is on an island in Honduras right now, so the quality of the internet may be even worse than the quality of our thoughts sometimes. So I'll share a couple other thoughts about this. One is a quote from Seneca, where he says, "He who indulges empty fears earns himself real fears." And what he's pointing to here is that a lot of times when we get caught up in these habits, in this preoccupation with things that may or may not happen, that we are drawn into temptations to make our lives worse. So we're constantly getting paranoid because we're indulging in ruminative thought that gets more and more twisted, more and more self-reinforcing, and kind of we're talking to ourselves in our head without actually checking back into our intuition in the present moment. We can end up doing counterproductive shit and not being the best version of ourselves. If we're ruled by fears, we're going to act out of fear. We're not going to have openness and trust towards others. And because of that, our interactions with others are going to be far, far more difficult. And we're going to do things that kind of get in our own way much more. If we're not trusting others and having this mindset of I'm battling, I'm at war with other people, the world is out to get me, the other people that I encounter are fundamentally opposed to me until proven otherwise, this attitude and posture toward the world of closeness and of defensiveness and of zero sum tug of war, it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we approach others without trust, they are far more likely to view us as somebody to also not trust and somebody to tell one thing and be a different way. Whereas if we lead toward trust and we lead with openness, yes, we expose ourselves to vulnerability. Yes, of course, we may look stupid because some people actually will defect in the prisoner's dilemmas that we find ourselves in and take advantage of us. But if we come with an open, less paranoid, less angry, less defensive posture toward things, we also can encounter people who will reciprocate and end up returning the openness in our direction. And this is the only way that we can really foster good new relationships, or at least sustainable relationships that are built on a strong foundation of openness and love and consciousness, as opposed to constantly feeling like we're battling and protecting ourselves against everybody that we encounter in our lives. And this can really, really change the character of our experience with others. And we can see that in certain contexts of our lives, we tend to be one way and it tends to get one result. In other contexts of our lives, we tend to be another way and it gets another result. If we inspect our own experience, our own memories, we can see that this is played out for us in both directions. Another concept associated with this whole, most of the fears that I've imagined have not come to be true, is this posture that arises within the brain of trying to quote unquote get to the bottom of it. And for me, this is an ever present temptation, something that is undergirding and behind the scenes, or an implied quest that my thinking, managing, planning brain is after quite a bit of the time, that is easy to get fooled by in perpetuity without ever looking back and inspecting whether or not what the thinking, managing mind is promising ever comes true. And this whole trying to get to the bottom of it thing is particularly insidious because it's what can draw us into this rumination, 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 and all the while convincing ourselves that this extra planning, that this extra anticipating, that rehearsing how I intend to speak my half of this conversation that may or may not even happen, or how I will defend myself in this argument, or quit back at this person some sharp comeback to this accusation they may throw at me, or this misdirection that they may pull. Ultimately, this posture of wanting to quote unquote get to the bottom of it is what can entice us by telling us that, oh, follow this next thought wherever it leads, follow this train of thought wherever it leads. And at the end of this, you will have some satisfying conclusion. But when we pay attention to, have we gotten to the bottom of it? Like when we've been thinking and ruminating about the potential situations that are coming up in our lives during the last 5 years, for example, how many times did we actually end up getting to the bottom of it and solving these situations that haven't happened yet? Or what percentage of the time were we thinking we were trying to quote unquote get to the bottom of it? And in the end, we just kept thinking, 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 thinking for years as a regular habit throughout our days, throughout our weeks, etc. And we never got to the bottom of it. Do we ever get to the bottom of these future situations that we're thinking about? Or is the ego like a dog gnawing on a bone that's just going to keep chewing, chewing, chewing on these thoughts and never going to reach a satisfying conclusion? The great lie that our thinking brains, our rumination, our thought patterns tends to tell us, our ego tends to tell us, is that just come follow me with this next thought. Put your attention toward this train of language that I have you in now, even if it's drawing you into a contracted state of mind, even if while you're in this, I'm separating you from the present moment and you're not fully engaging with your life that's right in front of you, with the peace that's already always available to you. Come follow this contracted train of thought. Twist yourself up in knots a little bit more about this thing that you're worried about. Indulge in this preoccupation and follow and follow and follow where this train leads to another thought, which leads to another thought, which refers to another thought, and keep going and going and going because you really want to get to the bottom of it. You never get to the bottom of it. You never get to the bottom of it. Your brain will keep telling you this story over and over and over and keep on going and going and going. And if we're not careful and we never inspect this and we never hold this logic to account, we may not realize that we can spend our entire lives making ourselves contracted, less healthy, less directly engaged, less loving, less connected with others because we're swimming in these recurring patterns of thoughts. And when these thoughts have the character of worry, when they have the character of fear, when they end up going down a rabbit hole that leads to paranoia, we can cause ourselves to suffer for our whole lives without realizing how optional this is. In the end, most of these conversations, interactions, things that we're doing day to day, they can be something that we rehearse and prepare for, or they can be something that we open ourselves to. They can be something that we allow ourselves to be fully present to listen to our intuition, to be guided by how we feel in the present, to tap into a greater presence and a flow, and ultimately achieve better results than a little bit of extra rehearsal, a little bit of extra rigidity, a little bit of extra anticipation could ever yield us. When we're flexible, when we're supple, when we're bendy in our minds, when we don't have a clear, cut and dry, black and white, this is how I'm going to answer this, this is how I'm going to answer this. I've thought through all of the things that may arise in my interactions during the next week. Ultimately, we actually can be more effective. Ultimately, we can be humble and magnetic and flexible and intuitive and ultimately perform far, far better than we would have if we were more prepared, quote unquote, but also much more rigid. So this is a posture that's really hard to achieve. Of course, there's a balance and a dance because thoughts are always going to be trying to gravitationally attract us back into this swirl of associations and this train that leads to another train that leads to another train that we can't get off unless we actually pay attention and bring awareness into the situation and realize that these are empty promises. These thoughts are telling me that they're going to get to the bottom of it. These thoughts are telling me that I need to do this. This is productive. This is essential to my survival. This is essential to not getting taken advantage of, or not feeling stupid, or not feeling shame, or not feeling embarrassment. But ultimately, these are lies. These are false promises. And if we look back at how we spent years of our life, lots of our attention, our days, our weeks, our months, we can see that these have been false promises for a very long time. And a lot of times when we've gotten caught up in anxiety, depression, upsetness, feelings of separation, loneliness, isolation, this ruminative thought pattern is at the core of it, while it was promising us that it was actually out there to solve our problems. And so this is something that I hope to navigate with more intentionality in this week. This is something that is always going to be drawing me back, and that I frequently make mistakes with, and that I frequently become blind again and have my consciousness covered up by this web of future and past in associations and thinking and thinking and thinking. But ultimately, if we can tap into our presence, if we can tap into the deeper, more intuitive, present moment, conscious awareness within us, we can navigate our situations with far more wisdom, with far more grace, and ultimately be happier and more effective and better at managing these situations, even if we're not as rehearsed for them. So that's an intention I have. I have my own temptations with this right now in this week that's drawing me back into rumination, but I'm hoping to remember that by fostering and cultivating this energy, this fountain of awareness, that I can be a better version of myself, and ultimately that these promises, these enchantments, and these temptations of following this next thought, of planning and ruminating and overthinking are false promises. These are not going to bring me to where I want to go. These are not going to bring me life and energy and peace. And so may we all remember this. May we all bring a presence. May we be mindful of our thoughts and remember how the character of them can really shape the quality of our experience. And may we have a great week. Thank you, everybody. Johannes is still enjoying a beautiful island in Honduras, where the internet is, unfortunately, like you would expect, on a beautiful tropical island in Honduras. And he's going to enjoy some scuba diving this week. Johannes, when you do listen to this, appreciate you, my man, and I will talk to you soon.
Hey Peyton, thank you for your message, and thanks for taking this to a whole new level, innovating upon the bad internet quality here on this island. I do not have much to add, but so much to say that right now I'm struggling with dengue fever, but recovering from it on a good path. And therefore, regarding the quotes from Mark Twain and Seneca, that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, sometimes we also suffer in reality. But what I think we can easily leave out is unnecessary suffering through overthinking a situation which is maybe painful or bad. And this comes to mind that the pain we experience sometime through accidents, illnesses, or even through relationship issues or whatever, this pain is inevitable. But the suffering, like pondering upon the pain and thinking about the future and trying to get everything under your control, which is not under your control. This kind of suffering is unnecessary and also avoidable. So the pain is unavoidable. The suffering is optional. Thank you very much for your time and your patience, and may we be well and happy into this week and recovering, not suffering, and see you next time, man.